Dr. Margaret Whitmore walked through the halls of Berkshire University like she owned the place. Her high heels clicked loudly on the marble floors. Students moved out of her way when they saw her coming. They knew better than to get in her path. Margaret had been teaching music at the university for 15 years. She was proud of her job and even prouder of her reputation. Everyone knew she was the toughest professor in the music department. Students feared her more than they respected her. But Margaret did not care. She believed fear made people work harder. Her office was on the 3rd floor of the music building. The walls were covered with awards and certificates. Her desk was always clean and organized. Everything had its place, and Margaret made sure it stayed that way. She wore expensive suits to work every day. Her hair was always perfect. Her makeup never had a single flaw. Margaret taught advanced music theory. This was not an easy class. Students had to understand complicated rules about how music worked. They studied famous composers from hundreds of years ago. They learned about harmony, rhythm, and melody. Margaret expected perfection from every student. During her classes, Margaret walked around the room with a stern look on her face. She carried a small notebook where she wrote down every mistake her students made. If someone played a wrong note, she would stop the entire class. She would make that student play the piece again and again until it was perfect. Many students dropped her class after just a few weeks. They said she was too mean and too demanding. Margaret was happy when weak students left. She believed only the strongest students deserved to learn music. She often told people that music was not for everyone. It was only for those who were serious and dedicated. Margaret had strong opinions about what real music should sound like. She loved classical music from Europe. She thought composers like Bach and Mozart were the greatest musicians who ever lived. She did not like modern music. She said it was noise, not real music. Jazz made her angry. Rock music made her even angrier. She believed these types of music were destroying the art form she loved. Every day after her classes ended, Margaret stayed late in her office. She prepared lessons for the next day. She graded papers with a red pen, marking every small error. She wrote angry comments in the margins when students did not meet her high standards. While Margaret worked in her office, she sometimes heard sounds from the hallway. There were footsteps and the sound of wheels rolling on the floor. She knew it was the cleaning staff doing their job. Margaret never paid attention to these sounds. She thought cleaning was unimportant work. The people who did it were invisible to her. The woman who cleaned the music building was named Maria Santos. She was 45 years old and had been working at the university for 8 years. Maria came to work every evening at 6 o'clock. She cleaned classrooms, emptied trash cans, and mopped floors until midnight. Maria was a small woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Her hands were rough from years of hard work. She wore a simple blue uniform and comfortable shoes. Maria did not speak much English when she first came to America, but she had been learning more every year. Every night, Maria pushed her cleaning cart through the music building. She started on the 1st floor and worked her way up. The building was usually empty except for a few professors who stayed late. Maria liked the quiet. It gave her time to think while she worked. As Maria cleaned, she often heard music coming from the practice rooms. Students would stay late to work on their assignments. Maria enjoyed listening to the piano music and violin pieces, even though she did not understand the technical parts. The music made her feel peaceful. Sometimes Maria heard Dr. Whitmore talking loudly in her classroom. The professor's voice carried through the thin walls. Maria could hear her explaining complicated music rules to students. Even though Maria was just cleaning, she found herself listening to these lessons. Margaret never noticed that Maria was listening. She never looked at Maria when she walked past with her cleaning cart. To Margaret, Maria was just part of the background, like the furniture or the walls. Margaret thought people like Maria could never understand real music. She believed education and training were the only ways to appreciate classical music. Maria had a secret that Margaret did not know. Back in El Salvador, where Maria was born, her grandmother had taught her to play piano. They had an old keyboard with several broken keys. Maria's grandmother showed her simple songs when she was a little girl. Even though they were poor, music was an important part of their family. When Maria came to America, she had to leave her grandmother's keyboard behind. She missed playing music, but she needed to work to send money back home. There was no time for music in her new life. She worked 2 jobs during the day and cleaned the university at night. But as Maria walked through the music building each evening, something inside her started to wake up. The music she heard reminded her of her grandmother's gentle hands teaching her to play. She remembered the joy she felt when she made beautiful sounds on the old keyboard. Margaret finished her work around 9 o'clock most evenings. She would pack her papers into her expensive leather bag and walk to the parking lot. She drove home to her big house in the nice part of town. She never stayed to see Maria's work. She never wondered about the person who made sure her classroom was clean for the next day. After Margaret left, Maria continued her work. She cleaned the professor's office carefully, dusting the awards and organizing the papers. She emptied the trash and cleaned the windows. Maria took pride in her work, even though no one ever thanked her for it. As the weeks went by, Maria noticed that her English was getting better. She understood more of what Dr. Whitmore said during her lectures. She learned new words about music, theory, and composition. Even though she was just cleaning, Maria was accidentally getting an education. One evening, as Maria was cleaning near Dr. Whitmore's classroom, she heard the professor talking about a famous composer named Chopin. Margaret was explaining how he wrote music that told stories about his feelings. Maria stopped her work to listen more carefully. She remembered her grandmother telling her the same thing about music and emotions. Margaret never knew that her harsh words and strict lessons were reaching someone she considered unworthy of education. She never imagined that the quiet woman who cleaned her classroom was absorbing everything she taught. In Margaret's mind, there was a clear line between people like her and people like Maria. She believed that line could never be crossed. But Maria was proving that music does not care about lines or boundaries. Music speaks to anyone who has a heart willing to listen. And Maria's heart was listening very carefully to every word Dr. Whitmore said about the beautiful art form they both loved, even though only one of them knew it yet. Thursday evening started like any other evening for Maria Santos. She arrived at Berkshire University at exactly 6 o'clock. She punched her time card and got her cleaning supplies from the storage room. The music building was almost empty. Most students had gone home for dinner. Maria began her work on the first floor as always. She cleaned the small practice rooms where students came to play their instruments. The rooms still smelled like rosin from violin bows and the wood polish from piano benches. Maria liked these smells. They reminded her that music lived in this building. As she worked, Maria could hear Dr. Whitmore's voice coming from the 3rd floor. The professor was giving a late class to graduate students. Her voice was sharp and demanding as usual. Maria had learned to recognize the professor's tone. She could tell when Dr. Whitmore was angry with a student just by listening to her voice. Maria finished the first floor and moved to the 2nd floor. She cleaned more practice rooms and a few small classrooms. The building was getting quieter now. Even the graduate students were finishing their work. Soon, Dr. Whitmore would leave, and Maria would have the building mostly to herself. Around 8:30, Maria heard Dr. Whitmore's high heels clicking down the hallway. The professor was leaving for the day. Maria continued her work, cleaning windows and emptying trash cans. She liked this time of night when the building was peaceful and quiet. After finishing the second floor, Maria moved to the third floor where Dr. Whitmore's office and classroom were located. She always saved this floor for last because it was the most important. The professor expected everything to be perfect in the morning. Maria unlocked Dr. Whitmore's office with her master key. The office was neat and organized as always. Maria dusted the awards on the wall and cleaned the professor's desk. She was careful not to move any papers or disturb anything important. As Maria worked, she noticed some music books open on Dr. Whitmore's desk. The pages showed complicated musical notes and symbols. Maria could not read all of them, but she recognized some things her grandmother had taught her. She saw notes that went up and down like a ladder. She saw symbols that told musicians to play loud or soft. After cleaning the office, Maria moved to the large classroom where Dr. Whitmore taught her advanced classes. This room had a beautiful grand piano in the center. The piano was black and shiny. Its bench was made of dark wood that matched the piano perfectly. Maria had always admired this piano from a distance. She had never touched it or even walked close to it. She knew it was expensive and important. Only serious music students were allowed to play it during classes. Tonight felt different somehow. Maria finished cleaning the classroom, but she did not leave right away. She stood near the door and looked at the piano. The room was completely quiet. No one else was in the building except the security guard who stayed in the lobby. Maria remembered her grandmother's hands showing her where to place her fingers on the keyboard. She remembered the feeling of making beautiful sounds with just the touch of her fingers. It had been so many years since she had played any music. Slowly, Maria walked toward the piano. She set down her cleaning supplies and looked around to make sure she was alone. Her heart was beating fast. She knew she was not supposed to touch the piano, but something inside her wanted to try. Maria lifted the piano bench and sat down carefully. The bench was the perfect height. She placed her hands above the keys but did not press them yet. The keys were white and black, just like her grandmother's old keyboard. But these keys were clean and perfect, not worn and chipped like the ones from her childhood. Very gently, Maria pressed one key. The sound was pure and beautiful. It filled the whole room with its rich tone. Maria smiled. She had forgotten how wonderful it felt to make music. She pressed a few more keys, playing a simple melody her grandmother had taught her long ago. The notes flowed together like water. Even though the song was simple, it sounded beautiful on the grand piano. As Maria played, memories came flooding back. She remembered sitting next to her grandmother in their small house in El Salvador. She remembered the way her grandmother's eyes would close when she played, as if the music took her to another world. Maria began to play more confidently. Her fingers found the keys they needed without her having to think about it. The music was still inside her after all these years. It had been waiting patiently for her to set it free. After playing her grandmother's songs, Maria tried to remember some of the music she had heard in the building over the past months. She had listened to so many students practicing different pieces. Some of the melodies had stuck in her mind. Maria attempted to play a piece she had heard a student practicing just last week. It was more complicated than her grandmother's simple songs. She made some mistakes, but she kept trying. Each time she played it, it sounded a little better. As she played, Maria began to think about the music lessons she had overheard from Dr. Whitmore's classes. The professor had talked about how music could express emotions. She had explained how different combinations of notes could make people feel happy or sad or excited. Maria started to experiment with the piano. She played some notes that sounded cheerful and bright. Then she played others that sounded mysterious and dark. She was discovering that she could paint pictures with music, just like Dr. Whitmore had said in her lectures. Time passed quickly as Maria explored the piano. She was so focused on the music that she forgot about everything else. She forgot about her cleaning cart waiting in the hallway. She forgot about the time. She forgot about the rules that said janitors were not supposed to touch expensive instruments. Maria began to create her own music. She combined melodies her grandmother had taught her with things she had learned from listening to Dr. Whitmore's classes. The music that came from her fingers was unlike anything she had ever heard before. As she played, Maria started humming along. She sang in Spanish, using words that expressed her feelings about her life in America. She sang about missing her family back home. She sang about working hard to make a better life. She sang about the music that lived in her heart. The song she created was both sad and hopeful at the same time. It told the story of a woman who had traveled far from home to find a new life. It spoke of loneliness and hard work, but also of dreams and determination. While Maria was lost in her music, she did not hear the footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Margaret Whitmore had returned to the building. She had forgotten an important book she needed for preparing tomorrow's lesson. She had driven all the way home before remembering it. Dr. Whitmore used her key to enter the building. She walked through the quiet halls toward her office. As she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, she heard something that made her stop. Someone was playing the piano in her classroom. The music was beautiful but unfamiliar. Dr. Whitmore frowned. She had not given anyone permission to use the piano after hours. Students knew they needed special permission to practice on the grand piano. Dr. Whitmore walked quietly toward her classroom. The music continued, growing more complex and emotional. Whoever was playing had real skill. The melodies were sophisticated, and the rhythm was confident. As Dr. Whitmore got closer to the classroom, she could hear singing along with the piano music. The voice was female, and she was singing in Spanish. The words were soft and emotional, even though Dr. Whitmore could not understand them. Dr. Whitmore reached the classroom door, which was slightly open. She peered inside and could not believe what she saw. The person playing her precious piano was not a student or another professor. It was Maria Santos, the janitor. Maria was completely absorbed in her music. Her eyes were closed, and her face showed deep concentration and joy. Her fingers moved across the keys with surprising grace and skill. This was not the fumbling of an amateur. This was real musical ability. Dr. Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway. She was shocked, confused, and angry all at the same time. How dare this cleaning woman touch her piano without permission? But the music she was making was undeniably beautiful. It was more moving than many performances Dr. Whitmore had heard from her own students. As Maria continued to play and sing, Dr. Whitmore noticed something else that surprised her. Scattered around the piano bench were pieces of paper with musical notes written on them. Maria had been composing her own music. Dr. Margaret Whitmore stood in the doorway watching Maria play the piano. Her mind was spinning with different emotions. She felt angry that someone had used her classroom without permission. She felt shocked that the janitor could play so well, but mostly she felt threatened. This woman was not supposed to understand music like this. Margaret had spent years building her reputation as the only true music expert in the building. She had advanced degrees from expensive universities. She had studied with famous teachers in Europe. Music was her territory, and she did not like seeing anyone else claim a piece of it. Maria finished her song and sat quietly for a moment. Her hands rested on the piano keys as she enjoyed the last notes fading away. She felt peaceful and happy. For a few minutes, she had forgotten about her hard life and connected with the music she loved. Suddenly, Maria heard a loud cough from the doorway. She turned around quickly and saw Dr. Whitmore standing there with an angry expression on her face. Maria's heart jumped into her throat. She had been caught doing something she was not supposed to do. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Dr. Whitmore asked in a cold voice. Maria stood up quickly from the piano bench. Her face turned red with embarrassment. She had trouble finding words in English when she was nervous. "I am sorry, Professor," Maria said quietly. I was cleaning, and I heard the music in my head." Dr. Whitmore walked into the room with sharp, angry steps. She looked at the piano as if Maria had damaged it somehow. Then she noticed the papers with musical notes scattered around the bench. And, "What are these?" Dr. Whitmore demanded, picking up one of Maria's handwritten compositions. Maria felt even more embarrassed. The papers contained her private thoughts turned into music. They were songs about her life, her family, and her dreams. She had written them during her break times, using napkins and scraps of paper when she could not find anything else. "Those are nothing important," Maria said, reaching for the papers. "Just some notes I wrote down." But Dr. Whitmore pulled the papers away before Maria could take them. She looked at the musical notes with a critical eye. The handwriting was not neat like her students' work. Some of the musical symbols were drawn incorrectly. The paper was cheap and stained. "You think this is music?" Dr. Whitmore asked with a mean laugh. "This looks like the scribbling of a child." Maria felt hurt by the professor's words, but she did not know how to defend herself. Her English was not good enough to explain how much these songs meant to her. She could not tell the professor about her grandmother or about the years of listening and learning. Dr. Whitmore gathered up all of Maria's papers. Some fell on the floor, and she left them there like they were garbage. Maria watched her musical dreams being treated like trash, and her heart felt heavy. "You need to remember your place," Dr. Whitmore said firmly. "You are here to clean, not to pretend you are a musician. This piano is worth more money than you make in a year. It is not a toy for you to play with." Maria nodded silently. She was afraid that if she spoke, she might start crying. She did not want to give the professor the satisfaction of seeing her break down. "I will not report this incident to your supervisor," Dr. Whitmore continued, "but only if you promise never to touch this piano again. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Professor," Maria whispered. Dr. Whitmore left the classroom with Maria's compositions in her hand. Maria was left alone with her cleaning cart and her broken heart. She finished cleaning the room quickly and tried not to look at the piano that had given her so much joy just minutes before. The next morning, Dr. Whitmore arrived at the university earlier than usual. She had stayed awake most of the night thinking about what she had seen. The image of Maria playing the piano kept coming back to her mind. But instead of being impressed, Margaret felt more and more angry. Margaret had worked hard to get where she was. She had spent years studying music theory and practicing piano. She had earned multiple degrees and built a successful career. How? Dare a janitor with no education think she could just sit down and play music like it was nothing? Dr. Whitmore decided she needed to teach Maria a lesson about knowing her place. But more than that, she wanted to show her students what happened when unqualified people tried to make music. She thought this would be a perfect example for her morning class. At 10 o'clock, Dr. Whitmore's advanced music theory class began. 22 students sat in their usual seats, waiting for the lesson to start. These were some of the best music students at the university. They had been studying music for years and took their art very seriously. Dr. Whitmore walked to the front of the classroom with a confident smile. She was holding Maria's crumpled compositions in her hand like evidence in a court case. "Good morning, class," she said in her usual commanding voice. "Today we are going to do something a little different. Instead of studying the works of great composers, we are going to examine what happens when people with no training try to create music." The students looked curious and a little confused. They were used to studying Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. They had never been asked to look at amateur compositions before. Dr. Whitmore held up Maria's papers for everyone to see. The handwriting looked messy compared to the neat sheet music the students were used to reading. Some of the papers had coffee stains and wrinkles from being carried in Maria's pockets. "These compositions belong to our building's janitor, Doctor," Whitmore announced with obvious pleasure. "She apparently believes that emptying trash cans and mopping floors qualifies her as a composer." Several students laughed uncomfortably. They were not sure if they were supposed to find this funny or not. Some of them felt bad about making fun of someone who was not there to defend herself. Dr. Whitmore spread Maria's compositions on the piano and began to point out what she called obvious mistakes. She criticized the way Maria had written certain musical symbols. She made fun of the emotional markings that Maria had written in Spanish next to some of the notes. "Look at this," Dr. Whitmore said, pointing to one of Maria's songs. "She has marked this section con dolor, with pain, as if adding Spanish words makes her music more authentic." The professor continued her attack on Maria's work. She played some of the melodies on the piano, but she played them badly on purpose to make them sound foolish. She exaggerated the mistakes and ignored the parts that were actually quite good. "This is what we call folk music pretending to be classical composition," Dr. Whitmore explained to her class. "It mixes different styles without understanding the rules that govern serious music." Unknown to Dr. Whitmore, Maria was in the hallway outside the classroom. She had come to empty the trash cans as part of her daily routine. When she heard her own music being played, she stopped to listen. At first, Maria thought maybe the professor was going to say something nice about her compositions. Maybe Dr. Whitmore had been impressed despite her angry words the night before. But as Maria listened longer, she realized what was really happening. Dr. Whitmore was using her music to teach the students about what not to do. She was making Maria's private songs into a joke for the whole class to laugh at. Every melody that meant something special to Maria was being turned into an example of failure and ignorance. Maria felt her face getting hot with shame and anger. These songs were pieces of her heart that she had put down on paper. They told stories about her grandmother, her journey to America, and her struggles to build a new life. Now, they were being mocked by a room full of privileged students who had never known real hardship. "The problem with untrained musicians," Dr. Whitmore continued, "is that they think emotion is enough. They believe that if they feel something deeply, it will automatically become good music. but real composition requires education, discipline, and understanding of musical theory. Maria listened as the professor explained why her music was worthless. She heard students laughing at the parts that were most meaningful to her. She felt like her soul was being dissected and found lacking by people who had never bothered to understand where she came from. But as Maria stood in the hallway, something began to change inside her. The shame she felt started to transform into something else. It became determination. It became courage. It became anger at the injustice of having her music judged by someone who had never lived her life. Maria thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that music comes from the heart, not from books. She thought about all the nights she had spent listening to Dr. Whitmore's lectures while she cleaned. She had absorbed more about music theory than the professor realized. She understood the rules, but she also understood that sometimes the most beautiful music came from breaking those rules. Dr. Whitmore was still talking to her class about the importance of proper musical education. She was explaining why people like janitors should stick to their own jobs and leave music to the experts. She felt proud of herself for teaching her students this important lesson about standards and qualifications. None of the students in the class knew that the composer of these pieces was standing just outside their door. They had no idea that their laughter was hurting a real person who had worked hard to create something beautiful. They were learning a lesson, but it was not the lesson Dr. Whitmore thought she was teaching. Maria Santos stood outside the classroom door, listening to Dr. Whitmore mock her music. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. She was angry, and that anger was giving. Her strength she did not know she had. For 8 years, Maria had been invisible in this building. She had cleaned around students and professors as if she were a ghost. She had listened to their conversations about music without ever being invited to join. She had absorbed their lessons from the shadows, never thinking she had the right to speak up. But now, listening to her private songs being turned into a classroom joke, Maria realized she had been invisible for too long. These compositions were not just pieces of paper with notes on them. They were parts of her soul, and she was not going to let them be destroyed without a fight. Maria thought about her grandmother back in El Salvador. She remembered the old woman's gentle hands teaching her to play their broken keyboard. Her grandmother had always told her that music was a gift from God, and gifts were meant to be shared, not hidden. "Music does not belong to rich people or poor people," her grandmother had said in Spanish. "It belongs to anyone who has love in their heart." Maria pushed her cleaning cart to one side of the hallway. She smoothed down her simple blue uniform and checked her reflection in a window. She looked like what she was, a working woman with rough hands and tired eyes. But she was also something else. She was a musician, even if the world had never recognized it. Taking a deep breath, Maria walked toward the classroom door. She could hear Dr. Whitmore still talking about the importance of formal education in music. The professor was explaining to her students why untrained people could never truly understand the complexities of classical composition. Maria reached for the door handle and paused for one last moment. Once she opened this door, there would be no going back. She would no longer be the invisible janitor who cleaned quietly and caused no trouble. She would be challenging the most powerful professor in the music department, but Maria's grandmother had also taught her another important lesson. When someone tries to steal your music, you must sing even louder. Maria turned the door handle and stepped into the classroom. The room fell completely silent. 22 students turned to look at the woman in the cleaning uniform who had just interrupted their class. Dr. Whitmore stopped talking mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open in surprise and annoyance. "Excuse me," Dr. Whitmore said sharply. "This is a private class. You cannot just walk in here." Maria stood near the door, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. The students looked confused and uncomfortable. They had never seen a janitor enter a classroom during a lecture before. Some of them recognized Maria from seeing her clean the hallways, but they had never really noticed her as a person. "Professor Whitmore," Maria said in her accented English, speaking more clearly than she had ever spoken before. "I heard you talking about my music." The professor's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. She had not expected to be confronted by the janitor, especially not in front of her students. This was supposed to be her classroom, her territory, where she had complete control. "Your music?" Dr. Whitmore repeated with a harsh laugh. "These scribbles are not music. They are the confused attempts of someone who does not understand what real composition requires." Maria walked further into the room, moving closer to the piano where her compositions were still scattered across the top. She could see her handwritten notes, crumpled and marked with Dr. Whitmore's critical comments. "You say I do not understand music," Maria said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But you do not understand my music. You read the notes, but you do not hear the story." Some of the students shifted in their seats. They could sense that something important was happening, but they were not sure what to do. This was unlike any class they had ever experienced. Dr. Whitmore crossed her arms and glared at Maria. "I have studied music for 25 years. I have degrees from the finest universities in Europe. I think I am qualified to judge whether something is music or not." "Degrees do not teach you to feel," Maria replied. "They teach you to think, but music comes from here." She placed her hand over her heart. The professor laughed mockingly. "Oh, how romantic! You think music is just about feelings. Let me tell you something. Real music requires technique, theory, and years of proper training. It requires understanding of form, harmony, and structure. Things you could never learn while pushing a mop." Maria felt the sting of those words, but she did not back down. "You think I learned nothing while I cleaned your classroom? You think I was not listening when you taught your students about Bach and Mozart? You think my ears were closed when you explained about major scales and minor scales?" Dr. Whitmore's confidence wavered slightly. She had never considered that the janitor might have been paying attention to her lectures. In her mind, people like Maria were incapable of understanding complex musical concepts. "Listening is not the same as learning," the professor said, but her voice was less certain than before. "Then let me show you what I learned," Maria said firmly. She walked toward the piano, and Dr. Whitmore moved to block her path. "Absolutely not," the professor said. "You are not touching that instrument again. I told you last night to stay away from it." Maria looked directly into Dr. Whitmore's eyes. "You have made my music your lesson for today. You have taken my private songs and used them to teach your students. So now let me teach them the right way." The classroom was completely silent. Students held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. They had never seen anyone challenge Dr. Whitmore like this. Most of them were afraid of the professor themselves. "You are disrupting my class," Dr. Whitmore said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "I could have you fired for this." "Maybe," Maria agreed. "But first, let your students hear what my music really sounds like when it is played. With understanding, not mockery." One of the students, a young woman named Sarah, spoke up unexpectedly. "Professor, maybe we should let her play. I mean, if we are studying these compositions, shouldn't we hear how they are supposed to sound?" Dr. Whitmore shot Sarah a sharp look that usually silenced students immediately, but other students began to nod in agreement. They were curious now. They wanted to understand what was happening between their professor and this janitor. "This is highly inappropriate," Dr. Whitmore said, but she was losing control of the situation. Maria did not wait for permission. She walked around the professor and sat down at the piano bench. Her hands found their position on the keys naturally, as if the piano had been waiting for her return. "You want to know about my music?" Maria said to the class. "I will tell you. This song is about my grandmother who taught me to play when I was 7 years old. We were very poor, but she saved money for months to buy an old keyboard with broken keys." Maria began to play the opening notes of one of her compositions. But this time, instead of the hesitant exploration she had done the night before, she played with confidence and purpose. The melody filled the room with warmth and emotion. "The black keys were missing from our keyboard," Maria continued as she played. "So I learned to make music with just the white keys. My grandmother said it would make me more creative, to work with less instead of more." Dr. Whitmore stood frozen beside the piano. The music Maria was playing was nothing like what she had expected. It was sophisticated and moving, with subtle harmonies that showed real understanding of musical theory. "This part here," Maria said, playing a particularly beautiful section, "is about leaving my family to come to America. The notes go up and down like a person climbing mountains and going through valleys." The students listened with growing amazement. They could hear the story in the music now. It was not just random notes put together by someone who did not understand composition. It was a carefully crafted piece that combined technical skill with deep emotional meaning. Maria transitioned into another one of her compositions. "This song is about working at night while my family sleeps. The rhythm sounds like footsteps walking through empty hallways. The melody sounds like loneliness, but also like hope." As she played, Maria began to sing softly in Spanish. Her voice was not trained like an opera singer, but it was honest and pure. The words told of sacrifice and dreams, of missing home while building a new life. Dr. Whitmore realized that everything she had said about Maria's music was wrong. This was not the fumbling of an amateur. This was real artistry, created by someone who understood both the technical and emotional aspects of composition. But admitting she was wrong would mean admitting that her entire worldview was flawed. It would mean accepting that musical talent could exist outside of formal education and expensive training. The professor's pride and prejudice warred with the evidence of her own ears. She could hear that Maria's music was beautiful and meaningful, but accepting that would shatter everything she believed about who deserved to be called a musician. Maria continued playing, her fingers moving across the piano keys with growing confidence. Each note seemed to come from deep inside her heart. The music filled the classroom with emotions that none of the students had ever heard in their formal lessons. The song Maria was playing told the story of her journey to America. It started with sad, low notes that sounded like saying goodbye to family. Then the melody grew stronger and more hopeful, like a person walking toward a new life. The rhythm changed to sound like a heartbeat full of excitement and fear at the same time. As Maria played, she began to use techniques that Dr. Whitmore had taught in her lectures. She added harmonies that created tension and then resolved it in satisfying ways. She used musical forms that the students recognized from their textbooks. But Maria made these techniques serve her story, not the other way around. "You hear this? Part?" Maria asked the class while still playing. This is what Dr. Whitmore calls a modulation. The music changes from a sad key to a happy key. It shows how sadness can turn into hope if you keep trying. The students were amazed. Maria was not only playing beautiful music, she was also demonstrating that she understood the technical concepts they had been studying. She had learned advanced music theory just by listening and thinking while she cleaned their classrooms. Dr. Whitmore stood beside the piano, her face showing a mixture of shock, anger, and something else she did not want to admit: respect. The music Maria was creating was undeniably good. It was more than good. It was exceptional. But the professor's pride would not let her accept what she was hearing. She had built her entire career on the belief that only people with formal education could create real music. Admitting that Maria was talented would mean admitting that she had been wrong about something fundamental. Maria moved into the most complex part of her composition. Her hands danced across the keys, playing melodies that intertwined like conversations between old friends. She incorporated elements of classical music that she had learned from Dr. Whitmore's lectures, but she also added rhythms and harmonies from her Latin American heritage. "My grandmother taught me that music is like cooking," Maria said as she played. "You can follow a recipe exactly, or you can add your own ingredients to make something new. Both ways can be good, but the second way tells people who you really are." The students began to understand something important. Maria was not trying to copy the European composers they studied in class. She was creating her own musical language that combined different traditions. This was not a mistake or a sign of ignorance. It was innovation. One of the students, a young man named David, raised his hand tentatively. "Professor Whitmore," he said, "this sounds like what you taught us about fusion in modern classical music, when composers like Janitor combined European techniques with South American folk music." Dr. Whitmore did not answer. She was struggling with the realization that her student was right. Maria was doing exactly what many respected modern composers had done, creating new music by combining different cultural traditions with classical techniques. Maria began the final section of her composition. This part was about finding her place in America while still keeping her identity. The music was hopeful, but also nostalgic. It spoke of belonging to two worlds at the same time, the old one she had left behind and the new one she was still learning to navigate. As she played, Maria's voice joined the piano in a wordless melody that soared above the harmony. Her singing was not technically perfect by conservatory standards, but it was filled with such genuine emotion that several students felt tears coming to their eyes. The music reached its climax with a series of powerful chords that seemed to shake the entire room. Then gradually it became softer and more peaceful, like a person finally finding rest after a long journey. Maria played the final notes with gentle care, letting each one fade naturally into silence. When the music stopped, the classroom was completely quiet. Nobody moved or spoke. The students were processing what they had just experienced. They had been prepared to laugh at the janitor's amateur attempts at composition. Instead, they had heard something that moved them more deeply than many professional performances they had attended. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then, something unexpected happened. Sarah, the student who had earlier suggested letting Maria play, began to clap. Her applause was slow and thoughtful, like she was acknowledging something sacred. David joined in, then another student, then another. Within moments, the entire class was applauding. But they were not just clapping politely. They were giving Maria a standing ovation. One by one, All 22 students rose to their feet. Their applause grew louder and more enthusiastic. Some of them were smiling with amazement. Others had tears in their eyes. They were applauding not just the music, but the courage it had taken for Maria to share it. Maria sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected the students to laugh at her or to side with their professor. She had not expected them to understand her music or to appreciate what she had tried to express. Dr. Whitmore remained standing beside the piano, not applauding. Her face was pale, and her hands were clenched at her sides. She was watching her carefully, constructed world falling apart. Her students were giving a standing ovation to someone she had told them was unqualified to make music. The applause continued for a full minute before gradually dying down. The students slowly took their seats again, but their faces still showed the impact of what they had heard. They looked at Maria with new respect and interest. Maria stood up from the piano bench and smoothed down her uniform. She gathered her crumpled compositions from the top of the piano, handling them carefully now that she knew other people could appreciate their value. "Professor Whitmore," she said quietly, "I know you think I do not belong in your world of music. Maybe you are right about that. But music does not belong to any one world. It belongs to everyone who needs it." Dr. Whitmore finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. That was quite impressive," she admitted reluctantly. Maria nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Professor. Your lessons taught me many things, even when you did not know I was learning." She walked toward the door, but before leaving, she turned back to address the students. "You are very lucky to study music in this beautiful place with these fine instruments," she said. "But remember that the most important instrument is not the piano or the violin. It is your heart. If your heart is closed, no amount of education will make you a true musician." Maria left the classroom and returned to her cleaning cart in the hallway. She had work to finish before her shift ended, but something fundamental had changed in that room, and everyone who had been there knew it. The students sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. They had learned more about music in the past 15 minutes than in many of their formal classes. They had seen that talent and understanding could exist in places they had never thought to. "Look," Dr. Whitmore walked slowly to her desk and sat down heavily in her chair. She stared at the piano where Maria had just performed, trying to reconcile what she had heard with everything she had believed about music and education. Sarah raised her hand tentatively. "Professor," she said, Do you think we could learn more about the type of composition Miss Santos was doing, the way she combined different musical traditions?" Dr. Whitmore looked at her student's eager face and realized that this experience had opened their minds to possibilities she had never shown them. Her job was to teach them about music, and today they had learned something she could never have taught them from a textbook. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think that would be a very good idea." As the class ended and students filed out of the room, they talked excitedly about what they had witnessed. Many of them made plans to research the type of fusion music Maria had demonstrated. Some decided to explore their own cultural backgrounds for musical inspiration. Maria finished her cleaning duties that evening, but she felt different as she worked. She was no longer invisible. She had found her voice and used it to share something beautiful with the world. Dr. Whitmore stayed late in her office that night, thinking about what had happened. She realized that her arrogance had almost caused her to miss witnessing something extraordinary. She had learned a lesson about humility that was more valuable than any degree she had earned. The next morning, Dr. Whitmore made an announcement to her classes. She was starting a new program to invite community musicians to share their traditions with university students. The first guest would be Maria Santos, who would teach a workshop on cross-cultural composition. Music, as Maria had said, truly belonged to everyone who needed it. And that day, everyone in the classroom had discovered they needed it more than they had ever realized.